Okay, we're recording.
Seen anything about, are they going to release a catalog for the house fund?
They're supposed to come out with one this week.
So we're recording now. So Jennifer, I think we're ready to go. So there we go.
All right.
Okay, when you're ready.
All right. Can you see my screen? Good. So tonight we're going to talk about using records for optimal operational management. And I get tongue twisted every time I say that, Patrick, but I do appreciate the title. And we're really going to focus on sheep and goats. So just a little bit about myself. I'm Jennifer Lutes. I am a county engagement specialist with the University of Missouri Extension. I was born and raised in Beaufort, South Carolina. I see we've got a couple other South Carolina participants on here, and you're in my heart. I have lived in Missouri for the last 17 years down in the far southwest corner in McDonald County. I am a graduate of the University of Arkansas. I did my bachelor's in poultry science and ag business and a master's in ag economics there. I do work for the University of Missouri, which sometimes can be a conflict, but because I live down here on the state line, I just claim both schools and go on. I do raise sheep currently. I have raised goats in the past, but the goats cleaned up the farm so well that I started raising sheep because I finally had grass again. And then I am married and I have 3 lovely children. Most days they're great. And that's what we can ask for, right? Just most days. So kind of it's a brief overview of what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to look at the cost of production and then the value of multiple births. We're going to look at improving farm profitability. We're going to look at production records and using those for decision-making purposes. And we are also going to have a market update here at the end. I do want to throw a disclaimer out. I do use sales pricing that is gathered from the Missouri's 5 USDA reported livestock markets. And the reason that I do that is, one, price discovery is publicly available. There are no secrets to this data. It's just a matter of going out and getting it. It's a very consistent market that everybody has access to if you live in the state of Missouri. And I kind of consider the livestock auctions as a price floor for alternative markets. Really like to be seeing higher prices if we're not selling at a livestock auction. Anytime you want to get local market reports for your USDA market reported sales, my market news at ams.usda.gov is where you will find those reports. They do keep them current. You can go back and get historical reports there too. So we're going to take a look at the cost of production and specifically the value of multiple births. When I pull this cost of production data, I am using the 2022 MU Extension planning budgets. So these are essentially enterprise budgets. We do have 4 of them, and I apologize. I hope they would be live today for you guys, but they're not live yet. However, as soon as they become live, this link will get you there, that tinyurl.com MU budgets. We do offer 4 planning budgets, goats, 2 for goats, 2 for sheep, for early and late kidding or lambing. So kind of what we'll look at here in this example will include fixed costs, which is land, equipment, taxes, and insurance. And then variable costs that includes labor, seed stock, replacement, feed, health programs, fuel, repair, maintenance, marketing, guardian animals, so on and so forth. There are a few other variable costs included in these budgets, but in this example, I'll kind of show you what I've pulled. So as we look through here, what these budgets came up with this year was about a total annual cost per ewe without labor of $190 per ewe. Now this is based on a 50 ewe herd and a 175% lambing rate. The goat budget is based on a 50 doe herd and then 150% kidding rate. So you can see the ewe and doe did cost a little more to raise those does. What we included in here were the operating costs and the ownership costs. If you look through those budgets, you'll see everything that's included on there. I will say that I did remove labor costs for this example because I'm assuming that you're providing your own labor and this makes all the profits a return to labor and management. And so, and keep in mind that I did use these budgets and I did an average of the early and late kidding and lambing budgets to come up with these. So we're going to look at an individual break-even price and then we'll move on to a herd break-even. For sheep, what we're looking at here is if a ewe has 1 lamb, then we allocate all of that ewes cost for the year to that 1 lamb. In other words, that 1 lamb needs to bring in enough money to cover that ewes cost for the year. So if her costs were $190 per ewe without labor, then we need to be able to sell that 1 lamb for $190 to break even on that individual ewe. If that ewe has twins, we're now looking at $95 per lamb to break even on that ewe for the year. And if she has triplets, then we're looking at $63.33 to break even for the year. Now, anything above that becomes profit. Anything below that is your loss for the year. We have the same example for the goats. If she has 1 kid per doe, then we're looking at needing $195 out of that 1 kid to cover that doe's cost for the year. And so on and so forth there for the twins and triplets out of that ewe or doe. I'll get tongue tied every time tonight stating ewe or doe or back and forth. So when we look at this, and we figure out what kind of price we need per pound, that 1 lamb per ewe to cover $190 for that ewe's cost for the year. If it's a 50-pound lamb, then that lamb needs to bring $3.80 a pound at market. That is not realistic, but that is what it costs. If we're looking at a 70-pound lamb and we still had 1 lamb, we need $2.70 a pound to cover that ewe's cost for the year. If we look down here at our triplets, if that ewe had triplets and we only needed to cover $63 per ewe, we're looking at about 90 cents a pound to cover that ewe's cost for the year. Same with the goats. It is a little higher, but not much. Goats tend to weigh a little bit less than sheep. So you see the weights are a little lower. And this is kind of looking at a break-even price at a 90-day weaning. So this would be selling these animals at weaning. And so if we look at twins on that kid per doe, if we needed to cover $97 per kid to cover our doe's cost for the year, and those kids weighed 50 pounds, we'd need a market price of $1.95 a pound in order to break even. So you can see really quickly how we move from a single and needing, almost $4 a pound, to twins needing $2 a pound, to triplets needing $1.30 a pound. Those prices change very dramatically when we move from singles to twins or triplets. So to take this example one more step further, if we have 1 lamb per ewe, we need that lamb to bring in $190 to cover that ewe's cost. And say that lamb weighed 50 pounds at weaning at 90 days when we sold that lamb. We needed $3.80 a pound to cover that ewe's cost for the year. If we look back at April, May, and June of this year at actual prices at 50 pounds at the market for Missouri, we can see that the market never supported that price. Our lambs never got there. If we look at the 60 or 70 pounds, at 60 pounds, again, the market never supported that price. At 70 pounds, if we were able to sell that lamb in April, we would have supported that price and made a little bit of profit, but no other months in those marketing months. If we look at the goats, it's kind of the same thing. That 40-pound goats, when we had 1 kid and needed $195 to cover our costs, or $4.88 a pound. None of our market prices covered that in April, May, or June of this season. What it did cover is it covered our 60-pound kid in all marketing months, and it covered our 70-pound lamb in April only. If we, oh, I meant to hide that slide, I apologize, it's the same one. So if we look at twins or triplets, you can see that in all marketing months, our costs were covered. So regardless of what the market was doing, if our ewe had twins or triplets, she would cover her cost and make a profit for the farm. The same thing happened with the goats. In all marketing months, twins and triplets covered our break-even price that we needed to break even for the farm. As we move over to a herd break even and out of that individual role. So we know that they don't all have singles, they don't all have twins, they don't all have triplets. So as we look at that, these are the same $1.90 per ewe or $190 per ewe. So at 100%, we have a single essentially. That means everybody in the herd had at least one lamb, okay? And we need, again, that $190 to cover those costs. If we look at the 200% lambing rate, that means everybody in the herd had twins or averaged out to be so. And we needed $95 per lamb to cover that herd's costs. As we start looking through here, we can see in the yellow is where some of the marketing months covered our costs. In green is where all of the 3 marketing months down here covered our cost. And in white is where none of the marketing months covered the costs that we needed to break even. So right at about 160% lambing rate is where even at our lightest lambs, we can cover all our costs for the herd. We break even and start making a profit. If we look at this slightly different and we start keeping those lambs 75 days past weaning. So we're no longer selling at that 90-day weaning. We're now keeping them for an additional 75 days. And let's just say it takes an additional $15 to keep them lambs that long. Look at what it does to our prices. Now we only need 130% lambing because our weights have gone up. Our marketing months have adjusted to those heavier weights. And at 130%, all marketing months cover all weights for our herd. So keeping those lambs about 75 days past weaning also enables us to have a lower lambing rate. If we look at goats, so that was sheep before, this is now goats. On the goats, we needed at least 150% kidding rate in order for all of our marketing months to pay and break even, to cover all our bills. If we keep those goats for an additional 75 days, say the same thing again, that it costs an extra $15 to keep them for 75 days, then we're looking at about 120% kidding rate. So essentially kind of what I'm telling you here is that if your kidding or lambing rate isn't high enough and you're not able to sell those animals at weaning to break even, if we can keep those animals around, put additional weight on them, even if it costs us a little more money, we're more likely to break even and make a profit on our farms. Does anybody have any questions before I move on?
Not so far.
All right.
Yes,
I am gonna
I'll have a question there. And
Yes.
that was kind of interesting when you said that is holding those. Actually, a question came in. We'll do that. Are you going to cover what went into that $190 to $195?
Yes, so anywhere you see green on these charts, sorry about that. Anywhere you see green on these charts, that is covering the price of that $195 for the goats. And in all the marketing months. So if we looked at a 40-pound kids, if all our kids average 40 pounds, we had 150% kidding rate at $3.25 is what we need to break even and cover all our costs. That is not putting any profit back to the farm, but that is breaking even. And so you can come down and look in all of our marketing months, we were able to get that price. And we were actually able to get more than that price. Is that what you were asking about, Patrick?
No, my question was more about, because you said there at the end, you said, well, we could hold those animals a little longer and still be able, if we couldn't sell them initially, we could hold them a little longer. How much longer are we talking?
So in this example, this was 75 days. There was an additional $15 a head cost on those animals. And so as you look down through here, the market held enough that we were actually able to have a lower kidding percentage.
Just hold them longer, put extra weight on for
But
at
keep
least
an extra-
75 days and then
Right.
still be able to break even. Because that's interesting.
And actually, it was more profitable. So if I had done this example in a different way, if we look over here at the 150% kidding rate and it's 60 pounds, we needed 217. We need 233 over here at the keeping them 75 days. But what's happening is that our market is changing a little bit. So yes, we're still able to be profitable. Obviously, the heavier we get them, the faster we get them, then we're going to make more profit. Especially if we're hitting that spring market.
Okay, are you seeing, because there was a few more questions, does the market hold for heavier weights even in October, November, and December? And then what inputs are you using to get the 190-pound lamb cost?
So Aaron, I will direct you over to our MU budgets. We've got a lot of ground to cover, but if you'd like to know the very details of that, there is also a spreadsheet that you can use and adjust your own costs for those budgets. It's a tinyurl.com/MU budgets, or you can do a Google search for MU extension budgets and it will get you there. They are last year's budgets, I do warn you, but the new ones should be coming up any day online. As far as do the market hold for heavier weights in October, November, December, we'll get there. That'll be part of the market update and you can kind of see where those prices end up over the season. They do tend to hold for these marketing months for this year in this example.
Okay. That's all we have for now.
Okay. So improving farm profitability. Major considerations are your costs or expenses would be your feed, your replacements, your replacement animals, and any medical expenses you might have. When we talk about income or revenue, market weight, the number of head, and market timing are our biggest considerations. Anything we can do to lower those costs or expenses or increase our income or revenue is going to help with farm profitability. So, I always say the most profitable herd is the one that costs the least to raise on your farm. And that's key. It's what's being done on your farm because they're all different. So having the right match of animals and forages, keeping those production records so we know what the heck's going on out there, calling animals that are producing below the farm's average. We will get there, I promise. Calling dams with singles and or poor growth, retaining replacements from animals producing above the farm's average, purchasing sires with proven productivity. So looking at those buck or ram tests or production records, on farm production records, off farm production records are even better. Learning how to supplement the proper nutrients at the lowest cost. So when we think about making a profit, and here's some of those seasonality charts that who was it? Laren, is that right? Laren and Josh were asking about. So one of the big keys is learning the seasonality of your market. Sheep and goats are seasonal short day breeders. They are often born in the winter or spring. We do have some breeds that will breed year round, and so this doesn't necessarily apply to them. But we also have seasonal market highs and lows. The highs tend to be in late winter, early spring. The lows tend to be in summer, early fall. And those lows correspond typically when animals are flooding the market and we don't really have much demand for them. A lot of our seasonal demands happen in late winter and early spring. When you think about Easter and then some of our ethnic holidays, they all tend to happen in the off season of when we have a lot of animals. These two graphs here, the top one is the seasonal price index for feeder lambs. Now this is out of San Antonio, Texas. Both of these prices are, and the reason that I use San Antonio, Texas here is because they are the largest market in the United States. And all the prices around the country tend to reflect what's going on in San Angelo. So I use them as my base. Their information is also really easy to get. So that's another reason that I use their market. As we look at sheep, we can see that sheep on that top graph from, right about December until May, that is when they are seeing their seasonal highs. And so what I mean by that is that those months tend to be higher than the average for the year, okay? So 1 on that graph is the average for the year. Anything above 1 is above the average annual price. Anything below 1 is below the average annual price. From somewhere in May, late May or early June until November is when sheep are seeing their seasonal lows. Not to say that you can't find good prices in those times, but they're much harder to find. And keep in mind that this is a 10-year long-term average. So that's what we're seeing there, not necessarily a one-off or a 1-year look. The sheep is actually a 4-year average. I'm sorry, a 5-year average instead of a 10-year average. And the goats, good grief. The goats are a 5-year average, the graph on the bottom, from 2015 to 2019. You can see on them that they have a much larger swing. The sheep only get down to about a 0.9 on this graph, so a 10% lower than average, where the goats get down to about 14% lower than the average annual price for the year. But again, what we're seeing is in December, we start kicking up above the average annual price, and then usually about June, we still somewhere between June and July, we dip down below the average annual price. And this is what you're seeing is when animals are generally flooding the market. These are typically when our seasonal ethnic holidays happen and when we have less supply in the market. So recognizing trade-offs. As an economist, I always think about trade-offs. It's always a give and take. I can feed these animals outstanding food, but I'm going to pay more money for it. And that's the trade-off. Okay. So recognizing trade-offs. If we breed in the off season, and so that we're having our offspring born in fall or summer rather than winter or spring, we can hit the market highs. However, research tells us that we have lower pregnancy and weaning rates, and we tend to have less head go to market, so less number of animals go into market. Supplemental feed, I can supplement animals and push them really hard, push these kids or lambs really hard so that I hit the market highs, but it's going to cost me more money to do so, and which will ultimately affect profitability. Now, if you sit down and play with the numbers and you're going to hit a $3 market rather than a $2 market, maybe that makes sense, especially if you can find a supplemental feed that'll get them to grow that doesn't cost very much. So some real key takeaways is that size matters. Enterprises with heavier offsprings at weaning are more likely to be profitable. Market timing always matters. Enterprises that sell during seasonal market highs are more likely to be profitable. Multiple births, it matters. When we have higher weaning rates, we are more likely to be profitable. And then enterprise costs, those enterprises that can keep their costs low are also, again, more likely to be profitable. When we look at the market, the goat market and the sheep market, the goat market has higher prices. However, the goat market also has a little bit of higher cost to raise those animals. But because that market has higher prices, there is more room for goat enterprises to have higher costs, to breed smaller animals, or to have lower weaning rates and still be profitable. When we look at the sheep market in comparison to the goat market has lower prices, but it really rewards enterprises with lower costs, larger animals, and higher weaning rates. So kind of what I'm saying is that if you are raising sheep, you really need to be on your toes about your costs and keeping your costs down. If you're raising goats, if you pay attention and keep your costs down, you can make quite a bit of money. So improving weaning rates. The biggest thing you can do to improve weaning rates is keep production records. Know who is producing what on your farm. Setting a weaning rate goal, that's important because that forces you to make tough decisions when you don't want to, especially if you don't meet that goal. Call individuals with lower performance. How the heck do we do that? As I look at this group of goats down here, and I think about who I might keep or who I might call, it's really hard to tell just by looking at them. So how do I even know they have lower performance? We're going to get there, I promise. Retain replacements with higher performance, and then remember that it takes time. Consistency is the key, and patience. It will take a lot of patience to get your farm exactly where you want it, if you ever get it there. Environmental factors tend to set us back a little bit. So
Jennifer,
Yeah, there
we
was
do
a
have a question.
question here. Is there a too large lamb for the meat sheep market? Basically, can lambs get too big for the market?
So the short answer is no, because we can sell everything. The long answer is that there is a sweet spot in the market, and depending on whether you're selling feeder animals or slaughter animals, there is a certain target weight that the market is really looking for, and they reward that weight by giving them the higher price. Oftentimes you'll see a heavier lamb get higher price than a lighter lamb on a per pound basis, and that's really where that sweet spot is. And we will cover some of that later. So when I talk about culling animals, the formal definition is to reduce or control the size of the herd by removing weaker animals. And because I made this presentation and I wanted to change the definition, I did so. And so I changed it to reduce or control the size of a herd by removing lower performing animals, because sometimes the animals that we're culling out of the herd are great for somebody else's herd because they're at a different standard than our farm may be. And they're not bad animals, but they're not performing to the standard we want them to perform at. So I like that lower performing rather than weaker. So when we start thinking about the profitability of culling, if we have a management emphasis on reproduction, on growth, on the growth rate of our lambs or kids, on carcass quality, because that makes us money, and then the ability to thrive in our environment. So if we focus on those things, we can improve the productivity and profitability of the farm. And the reason I say it's the ability to thrive in the environment. What works on my farm may not work on the farms in South Carolina. It will not work on the farms in Alaska. They're just different, right? So you have to have what's going to work in your environment. There are a lot of reasons to cull animals. Lots of reasons. I don't need to read through this list for you. I know you're all very capable of that. But when I think about this, there are health reasons, there are confirmation reasons, there may be behavior problems. My favorite goat that I ever had, she was a pet. Her name was Pest because she was always pestering you. So that was her nickname, was Pest. She spent 6 years on the farm. She was a very intelligent animal. And one day I come home and all of the goats are in the road. And I'm like, okay, what's going on? So I put them in, I go out and check fences. I see nothing. There's no obvious reason that all the goats are in the road. Go to work the next day, come home, all the goats are in the road. I'm like, what is going on? Okay, put them back, put them all back. Saturday comes around. I follow my goat herd stealthily from behind so they can't see me, thinking that they're going to be fed. And what do I find? I find Pest holding down. So my exterior fence is about a 3.5 foot field fence, and then 3 strands of barb above it. She was holding the field fence down, allowing the rest of the herd to climb through, and then she was climbing through the fence after. which is how they were all getting out of the fence. Needless to say, behavior was an issue. There was nothing wrong with the fence. I did put some more fence stays to it, but they were there. And that animal ended up being culled because of behavior problems. So she was a perfectly good animal. However, she had behavior problems. So as we look at this group of Savannah goats, and I think about who I might keep and who I might cull, by looking at them, I really have no idea. This young lady in the front, she seems a little thin, but I don't really know her. Oh my gosh, I've done it now. I don't really know any history on her. I don't know what's going on with her. And if there's anyone in this picture that I might really seriously think about culling just from looking at, it would be this one here in the back, who is looking for an obvious way to an escape. Can y'all see my mouse okay? Okay. Everybody else, I have their attention with this picture, but this young lady back here, she looks like she's ready to go. And when you have one go, you know, they all tend to learn how to do that. So the biggest thing that we need to learn is that production records make it easy to figure out who to keep and who to cull. So when we keep production records, we're going to keep health records. Any interventions that we have to make for these animals, we're going to write that down and keep track of that on a per animal basis. So vaccinations, medications, hoof trimming, deworma, FAMACHA scores, weight, anything that we do to these animals, any information that we can get from these animals, we keep track of that. Mothering ability, that's a big one. If there's any birthing problems or receptiveness to new babies, the number of born and weaned, and then the growth rate of those babies. We need all that information. Behavior, like I said, escape artists, aggression, any kind of poor behavior. Maybe they just don't like to be with the herd and they want to be away from the herd. That may be a behavioral issue because then they may be more subject to prey animals. And then performance. So we'll record all the births and then how well those offspring develop. So when I think about who I attribute what to, I attribute to the doe or ewe pre-birth to weaning. So pregnancy, being the ability to get pregnant, that's what I consider pre-birth. And then everything that happens from pre-birth to weaning is attributed to that doe or ewe. If for some reason a lamb has a predator attack it and kill it, that was mom's fault, and mom's going to be credited with that loss. Okay, even if it wasn't technically her fault, right? So with that, we write down birth weight, birth order, whether it was a single, twin, or triplet, weight gain to weaning, so 90 to 120 days, whenever your weaning is. And then what we attribute to the kid or lamb is really birth to weaning. Okay, so there's some overlap there. And then pre and post weaning weight gain. Okay. When we start keeping track of production records, we have to have all of this information. Okay, well, we don't have to have confirmation remarks. We have to have everything else. It's good to have any confirmation remarks though. Everything needs to be identified, tagged, tattooed, something that you know who that animal is, and not necessarily by sight. Okay, that way anybody can come in and know exactly who that animal is and match it up to the production records. Age of dam is important. If you don't happen to know the age of the dam, there are ways to mouth that animal or look at its teeth to determine how old that animal is. Get a good rough estimate anyways. Date of birth of all kids or lambs, weight at birth of all kids or lambs, sex of the kid or lamb, whether it was a single, twin, or triplet, the weaning date, and the weaning weight. And I always include confirmational remarks. When I was raising goats, one thing that I struggled with was multiple teats on the goats. And so I would mark that in the confirmation remarks, and anything with multiple teats I did not retain to the herd. So as we look through this example, what I want you to realize is we're going to step through a bunch of equations, and at the end, it'll help us sort out who to keep and who to cull. So if we look at average daily gain, And average daily gain is literally just the average weight that is gained between birth and weaning on a daily basis. So we take the weaning weight, we subtract the birth weight, and we divide it by the day of age to come up with average daily gain. When we look at this data chart, okay, we have does, we have kids, we have whether that kid was a male or female, whether it was a single, a twin, or a triplet, its date of birth, its birth weight, its 90-day weigh date. Notice that we weighed them all on the same day. And then the 90-day weight, okay? When we calculated average daily gain based on this formula up here, we can see that kid number 18 had the highest average daily gain. He gained almost half, she gained almost half a pound a day from birth to weaning in that first 90 days. But note that it was a single, and note that our top two average daily gain animals were both singles, okay? So what I want you to realize is that when we use average daily gain, it's good for a spot check to make sure that the animals are on track to do what they need to do. But it's not really good for sorting animals on who is better than whom, because average daily gain really selects for single births, heavier birth weights, and older dams. It does neglect to account for multiple births, sex of dam, and sex of the offspring. It selects for older dams simply because when a dam is no longer growing, they are able to put most of their nutrients to milk production, and that's why it selects for older dams. So the other piece is the average daily gain and actual weaning weights. They treat all dams and offspring as equal when we know they're not. We have multiple ages out in the herd. We have multiple things going on. So if we have a 2-year-old dam that's trying to raise babies and a 5-year-old dam that is trying to raise babies, those animals are going to be different, and we know they're different. What we do to fix this, though, is we use adjusted or corrected weaning weights. And this adjusts for the dam age. It also adjusts for the number weaned and the sex of the kid or lamb. And when I say adjustments or corrections, these are coming out of research. So this chart on the left is corrections for 90-day meat goat kids. It does come out of Virginia Tech. And essentially what's happening here is we have, if a goat had 1 kid and weaned 1 kid, it got a value of 1. And these are multiplicative values, meaning that we'll take their weaning weight and we'll multiply it by the value to adjust for it. And so when we multiply anything times 1, the answer is itself. So in other words, this doesn't change their weaning weight. So this is our baseline. Anything that's a 1 is a baseline. So age of dam is 3+. That is what we consider a mature goat or sheep, is at least 3 years old. And then buck or wether is the baseline on the kids. When we look over at a generic for sheep, so on the right-hand side is the generic for sheep, we can see the baseline is a ewe age 3 to 6. If it's at ewes older than 6, they're actually giving her a little extra credit, a little 5% boost. The sex of the ewe is, the sex of the lamb is ewe, is the baseline. And what they're doing by lowering these numbers is discounting the ram or wether. We know that ram lambs grow faster than ewe lambs. We know that buck kids grow faster than doe kids. That's kind of what this is saying. They just went about it in a slightly different way. The other part of this is that the type of birth or rearing is that 1-to-1. So 1 born, 1 weaned is the baseline. And we'll step through this a little bit more. This came out of the Sheep Production Handbook from 2015. Keep in mind that the adjustments or corrections, they are generic ones. The 2 on the screen are generic ones. And then there are breed specific ones. So I want to say, I can't think of any now. I think Katahdins have a breed specific one, if I remember right, on the sheep. They have some breed specific adjustment factors. And then, EPDs on our cattle are kind of a similar type thing, right? So we will step through 3 equations, Average daily gain we've worked through, a 90-day weaning weight. So we're going to adjust all lambs to that 90-day corrected date, meaning that some were older, some were younger. We're going to make them all 90 days and equal. And then we're going to look at the adjusted weaning weights. Essentially, we're going to take the 90-day weaning weight and multiply it by the adjustments we saw in that chart. So as we look here, this was the same data. This is the same data as before, the same average daily gains. You can see kid number 18 here at 0.48 average daily gain. Litter size adjustment, it was a single, so it didn't get an adjustment. It's just multiplying times 1. Age of dam adjustment, that dam was a mature dam, so she didn't get an adjustment. Sex of kid adjustment got 0.11, so 11% adjustment for being female rather than male. But what I want you to look at is when we correct to the 90-day weights, we include the adjustments. I want you to see that these two single kids slid down the chart. They are no longer the top ranking in our list here. Our top ranking now is a female born to doe 2 who happened to be twins. It was actually both our twins that made the top of it. And their corrected day weights were 64 and 57 pounds each. So when we start thinking about who we keep and who we call based on these records, these were singles, and both of these were out of mature goats, mature does. I would consider maybe culling number 5 and number 4 doe and making room in our herd for somebody that's going to have twins. Because of those price adjustments we saw earlier, covering our costs with a single is a challenging process, right? So as we start working through this, if we create from this a herd index, or we take that adjusted weaning weight that we have already figured out, and we divide it by the average weaning weight of the herd. So what does that mean? We added all of these together, found the average of the corrected 90-day weights, and we divided each individual by the average, okay? So notice the ranking didn't change. These are still the same ranking as we had before, but now what we have is we have doe number 1, kid number 12 is the middle. They are the average of the herd. Anything above the 1 in the herd standing or the index is going to be bringing up the herd average. Anything below a 1 is going to be bringing down the herd average. So as we think about who to keep and who to cull, these 2 young females, they did all right. They're bringing up the herd average, but again, they're singles. And so that would be a first consideration for me. Down here at the bottom, doe number 6, she did have twins, so that's a good thing. However, her twins grew at a very slow pace compared to everybody else. And so I might consider culling her too.
Jennifer?
Yes.
There was a question. It says, where can we find templates for these records? Are there any,
which records?
this question?
For the budgets?
Not for sure.
I think maybe it came up when you had the charts on there that you're figuring out which ones are better.
The production records.
Production records. So I honestly created my own.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
I did create my own, and I'd be willing to share those with you. If you would email me, I can kind of share that template that I have. But know that you will have to adjust it based on the size of your herd. So what I've done are in Excel. And no, the spreadsheets are not part of the budget. It is something I need to formalize though, and really make a public document for. That link is to the budget. So if anybody needed that. But yeah, if you want to give me shoot me an email or something, I'll be glad to work with you and get it set up for what you need for your herds. So culling offspring or dams, right? You heard my topics, right? Whether it had a single or twin, if it was top of the heap or the bottom of the heap. First and foremost, though, is confirmation. They don't have the correct confirmation. That's what we need to be culling and correcting in our herds first and foremost. And then everything else becomes farm level decisions. Do we keep anything above a 1? Do we cull anything below a 1? I mean, that's really the farm level decision. If the farm is in a phase of expansion and they really need to grow the herd, you know, maybe we're going to keep anything from a 0.85 up. It really depends. If we're in a point of contracting, maybe we only keep the top 10% and we get rid of everything else. One thing I always like to ask is hide color important for meat production? There may be a slight market price for the right color, especially that red head on a white body on a goat, right? We know that there is a slight market price increase for those animals. However, I would never choose color over production, because once we take the hide off of those animals, that market price tends to go away. And if our red-headed, white-bodied animals are productive and they're getting the bonus at market, great. But if they're not productive, I would not keep them simply because they have a red head. So now we know a little bit more about these animals. We can make some decisions about who to keep and who to cull, right? We can now compare between the young and maybe the old, the ones that haven't had babies and the ones that have. I will caution you that these farm records work only within year. So 1 year, we cannot compare across years on the kids or lambs, can only compare within the same season. We cannot compare across farms. So I can't take your records and compare them to my records because it doesn't work, because we have different environmental and management differences. And so in order to control for those things, it needs to be the same herd of animals bred in the same year, okay? And preferably the same season. If you have some fall kidders and some spring kidders, we need to probably separate those and look at those separately. So those were really looking at the kid or lamb comparisons. If we start looking at doe comparisons, okay? So we have the weaning weight, we have birth weight. If we look at the adjusted total weaning weight, which is the sum of the adjusted weaning weight of all of her babies, and then we turn that into a dam production efficiency or index, okay? So if we look at that, and this was the average total weight or adjusted total weight for all of the lambs, kids. And then we divide that by the doe's weight, we can get a weaning weight percentage per doe, okay? And we would like to see dams weighing at least 100% of their body weight. Now, we do weigh them at weaning, okay? So we're weighing these does and lamb and ewes at weaning. And so that's the lightest they're ever gonna be, hopefully. But we want to see them wean at least 100%. So this is another way that you can kind of compare does, okay? And see how they're doing. Obviously, does or ewes that only have singles are not probably going to have a large percent of their body weight weaned, as certainly not as compared to those that had multiples. So we have any other questions?
Don't see any.
I'm going to step into the market update. One thing I want to show first, like I said, I like to use San Angelo's prices because they're easy to get to and they're easy to discover, and they are one of the largest markets in the country. If we look kind of over time at this blue line, and this is that average annual price for slaughter kids and yearlings, 40 to 60 pounds. Those are their selection 1 kids. you can see that we have been in an upward trend for the last 20 years. I do not have 2021 on here because we have not completed the year, so I can't find that average annual price yet. But as of 2020, it was $3.17 a pound. If we look at lambs, and these are slaughter lambs, choice and prime 1 to 2s, 100 to 150 pounds, you can see that for a while we were keeping up. They had about the same type of trend line going on until about 2011. And then the goats really broke free of the lambs, and the lambs really kind of became fairly steady up until last year. Last year, lamb saw a spike to about $1.91 a pound. We're going to kind of take a look at why. Okay. So if we look at the US sheep and lamb inventory from 1900 to 2021, you can see that we have been on a downward trend since about the 1960s. Sheep production, when cotton went out and wool went out, or excuse me, when cotton came in and synthetics came in and those kinds of things, and wool started kind of going out, is really when our sheep production started weaning. You also see here after World War II, there was a dramatic drop also about the 1940s to 50s, right in there, those dramatic drops also. There's a lot of folks that say that folks that came out of World War II, veterans that came out of World War II will never touch mutton again. They just ate too much of it. And so I have to wonder if that's not part of it. As we look at the top 10 states, so this is US sheep and lamb inventory as of January 1, 2021. USDA NASS records this every year. You can see the top 10 states for sheep and lamb production. Most of the sheep and lamb production is taking part in the western part of the United States. The top 10 states are Texas, California, Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, South Dakota, Idaho, Montana, Iowa, and Oregon. If we look at the change from last year to this year, you can see kind of the Midwest really had a lot of downward trends in their sheep population, of course. But then there were some states that really picked up in their sheep production as well. Tennessee, Virginia were some of the biggest ones. When we look at who is importing sheep meat, and this is back in 2019, which is the most recent data I could actually get, China is the world's largest country that imports sheep meat. United States is the second largest. We're probably never going to catch China, but we're followed by France, United Kingdom, and the United Arab Emirates. And I will caution you as we move through here, you'll see this tons down here, and it is spelled a little funny because this is in reference to metric tons, which is more than 2,000 pounds. It's actually 2,200 pounds. I did want to put that on there in case somebody tries to utilize this, and so they know that that is not just equivalent to 2,000 pounds. And I say that with kindness because I goofed that up for a while myself. As we look at the US sheep meat, and so what we're looking at here is we're looking in the red line as US production from 2000 to 2022. You can see that our production has almost dropped in half. We were at 106,000 metric tons in 2000. In 2022, we were only at 63,000 metric tons of domestic production. This dotted line is our imports, and that has more than doubled since 2000. So we were at 59,000 tons, and in 2020, we were at 137,000 tons. So when you add these two together, we come up with the consumption. That is all consumption is the addition of those two lines. But what I want to draw your eye to is that 68% of US consumption is from imported meats. 68%. We don't even produce half of what we're consuming in this country. In 2020, we processed 2.2 million sheep in the United States, and it was less than half of what we needed. So keep that in mind. The other big thing is that 98% of our imports do come from a combination of Australia and New Zealand, with the bulk of those, about 70-something% coming from Australia. If we look at the feeder lamb prices, so again, we're back at San Angelo, Texas. This is that 60 to 90 pound feeder lamb market. That red line is our 5-year average from 2015 to 2019. The blue dotted line is our 2020 prices, and the blue solid line is our 2021 prices year to date. You can see that our current year, we are well above our average prices for the year on our feeder lambs. Is it going to stay that way? That's the big question. I'm going to look over at Australia now. Okay, so we're going to move over to Australian data. And the reason that I bring this to your mind is because remember 98% of our imports are from that part of the world. And so Australia in their market outlook said that they are increasing carcass weights combined with lamb slaughter estimates, and they remain set to deliver record lamb production in 2022. So what's been going on in Australia? Why the heck are our prices gone so crazy this last year for both goats and sheep? Big thing that's going on is Australia is recovering from some major drought and major fires in their sheep and goat production areas of their country. And so they have been rebuilding their herds, and they are almost primed to deliver record lamb production in 2022. Goats will be a little bit longer than the lambs, but they are ready to start going. Now, the other thing that I want you to keep in mind too is these are their projections. Their sheep never really fell off as much as their goats, and you'll see that here in a minute. But these are their projections. And so what was happening is their carcass weight, they've been increasing their carcass weight over time. Their herd's been getting smaller, but they've been delivering larger lambs, okay? So we will see soon our prices probably starting to drop again, or at least level back off.
So Jennifer, there was a quick question. Is it cheaper to produce domestically or import? I guess cheap organs.
So it depends. Australia raises sheep like we raise sheep. They farm, they produce sheep like we do. However, in their goats in Australia, they have what is known as rangeland goats. Essentially, these are part of a feral animals, and they go out and they round up these goats and take them into harvest. So think about like rounding up a bunch of deer in the United States and then taking them to harvest. We don't actually farm those animals. It's just literally a harvesting of wild animals. Australia is in the process of moving to a more farmed type atmosphere with their goats. And so you ask if it's cheaper. I don't know is the short answer. I don't know what it costs in Australia to raise their animals, but I have a hard time thinking that they can raise animals and ship carcasses to the United States cheaper than we could raise and produce them ourselves. But what happens is that demand, we're buying this meat because it's available. It's a regular market that, grocery stores and restaurants and places can buy this meat from, and they know the quality they're going to get. It's packaged in the way they want it packaged, and that's what helps set our prices. So Australia has done a really good job at finding the markets in the United States to sell their products to. Unfortunately, they've done a better job than we have domestically finding those markets. So they help set our prices, to be honest with you. So when demand is up and supply is down, and they're ordering more imports, that's really helping keep us going. Sounds kind of counterintuitive. As we shift gears a little bit and look at goats rather than sheep. So this is our meat and other goat inventory. So this is not total goat inventory. This is meat and other. From 2003 to 2011, you can see that the meat numbers hit a peak in about 2008 at 2.5 million head. And then we've settled off at about 2 million head, roughly a little over 2 million head in the United States. As we look around the country, it's almost the exact opposite picture. Where we're seeing goats is really kind of towards the Southeast, Midwest, northwest, or excuse me, northeast, and then southeast, but really the eastern part of the country, no longer the western part of the country. Texas is the hands down leader of goat production. I don't think any other state will ever catch Texas unless Texas just suddenly quits raising goats. Tennessee comes next, followed by California, Oklahoma, Missouri, Georgia, Kentucky, Florida, Alabama, and North Carolina. If we look at the change in numbers in these animals, you can see that the western part of the United States kind of has decreased their numbers, and this is a year over year. I apologize, I didn't change that title. This is January 2020 to 2021 or to 2021. But you can see that there are some states that have picked up numbers. Overall, we had a loss in goat numbers from 2020 to 2021 of about 2.2 thousand head. We look at the top 5 countries that import goat meat. Again, this data is for 2019 because it's the most recent I can get. The United States is the #1 importer of goat meat in the world, which blows my mind. We do tend to trade places with the United Arab Emirates. Occasionally, they import a little more than we do. We kind of bounce back and forth. In 2019, we were the top importer. And then Saudi Arabia, China, which is Taiwan specifically, and then Oman. We look at that same type of chart. If we look at our domestic production from 2006 to 2020, you can see that it is roughly equivalent. We really haven't changed much of our production. This data actually comes from our federal inspected and non-inspected slaughter of goats. So this is not taking account for any goat that is home slaughtered. Okay. Then we follow up our imports. Notice how our imports kind of fell off in 2018 and 2019. That was Australia and their fires and the drought and just struggling. Okay. And then consumption. Consumption tends to follow our import pattern because we import more goat meat than we produce. In 2020, we processed 624,000 goats in the United States, according to that commercial inspected and non-inspected slaughter. And 96% of our imports come from Australia and New Zealand. 62% of US consumption was imported in 2020. So we do a little better on the goats, keeping up with demand, but not much. If we look at those prices, these are the slaughter kids from 40 to 60 pounds at San Angelo. You can see that average. You can see our trend line, also our seasonal effect. 2020, we know was a great year to be a goat producer. We started really creeping up towards the end of 2020. As we look at 2021, it went off the charts. And then we come down into about our summer months, which would be Australia's winter months. And you can see when Australia really started shipping again. This is kind of when their production really started picking up this year. So prices, we do expect prices to go higher than last year because that has been our trend with our goats for the last 20 years. However, I don't expect it to be like it was this spring, unless something happens to shipping out of Australia. I just don't see us getting there. If we take a look at Australia's goat slaughter and carcass weights, so the previous one was sheep, this one is specific to goats. You can see over the last couple of years, especially 18 and 19, the number of head that they slaughtered in Australia was much lower than previously. This again is due to those droughts and fires. They just did not have the production that they anticipated from those rangeland goats. And then 2020, these were projected, and Australia should be coming out with their market update anytime. This is accurate as of today because it wasn't out yet. The new report wasn't out yet, but they'll have a new report coming out anytime. So year to date, this was as of June of this year, 2021, goat exports are operating 20% better than the 2020 levels. Driven by continued growth in the United States and the explosive volume upticks from South Korea. So South Korea started buying goat meat from Australia. And then of course, the United States. So we look back at this graph of our average annual prices for kids and lambs. I really expect to see kids to go up a little bit more. I expect to see it average out probably somewhere around 330, 340 a pound. And on the lambs, I really anticipate it staying about the same for this year. As we move into next year and really think about 2022, I don't see lambs doing a whole lot better. I expect them to stay fairly level. And then kids may go up another 10 cent or so, 10 or 15 cent is kind of what I expect for that average annual price. Now, keep in mind, those are not going to be market high prices and they're not going to be market low prices. It is going to be that average annual price for the year. And folks, that's what I have. Got done a little early and there's plenty of time for questions. So if anybody would actually like to say a question, if you raise your hand, we'd be glad to have you unmute, to call on you and have you unmute and you can ask your question.
And if you look down at the bottom of your screen and see where it says chat, share the screen, and then you look all the way over to the right and it says, it should say reactions, depending upon what system you have. And if you look in reactions, that will help. That's, you can raise your hand right there. And there's other symbols and things you can use.
Eric, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm doing this on my phone, so I'm just kind of having trouble moving through.
You're fine. Go right
Yeah,
ahead.
so on that original where you were going through the numbers, the $195 per ewe or per doe, are we? Is that like depreciation and electric? Well, is that all your farm expense? Just kind of rolled into a number for cost of production?
It really is. Yes. Yes, it is. So what you're seeing on the screen is last year's, the 2021 planning budget. Okay. Mind you, these numbers came from the 2022 planning budget. It's just not up publicly yet. It's coming. But what you're looking at is literally the total cost minus the operator and hired labor. And I averaged it for the early and late kidding, and I averaged it for the early and late lambing. Okay, so I averaged it for both species across both budgets because there is a difference. And so, yes, it includes all of these things. So the operating costs, the replacement, breeding supplies, pasture, hay, supplement, mineral, animal health, guard dog replacement and food, bedding and stockpiling, marketing, machinery, fuel, labor, repair, facility maintenance, operating interest, your business overheads, so utilities, professional fees, any miscellaneous, taxes and insurance, economic depreciation and facilities and equipment, and then the opportunity interest on capital investments. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
A couple of other questions in the chat.
I'm reading Collins now. Colin, do you mind unmuting and kind of telling me?
Yeah, sorry about that. I work for, whoops, sorry about that. My company focuses primarily on manufacturing software, but one of the benefits is it's extremely flexible. And I set it up to start tracking my herd. So I track a lot of the metadata that you showed in one of your early slides there, birth weight. I track spires, dams, breeding dates. I track medications, maintenance to the animal, whether it's, hoof trimming or what have you. I was just looking, I started this about 5 years ago, and what little I could learn from, joining some of the popular Facebook groups and books and friends. And I'm always looking for, that's why I'm here, is to learn more so I can make a better herd down the road. And I didn't know, because I was busy with the child at the time, I didn't see the earlier slide, if it was kind of an all-inclusive list, or if you had to reference out the things that you're tracking from a herd management.
So I did have a pretty inclusive list. Maybe I can find it again. See if I can get back to it here. These were the things that were necessary to do the calculations that I showed on this presentation. Does
Okay.
that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I figured I could go through your formulas and make sure I had those all captured. Like for what I was prototyping in my software, I track, like breeding dates, so that I can have a pretty dang good estimate on what my kidding dates are going to be,
Sure.
things like that. When I had some dairy goats, I was tracking milk production. So same thing, I could start figuring out who needed to be culled and who didn't, if the ones that are producing well versus not producing well. Like I said, just always looking for other ideas. My company's software is free, so I get to play with it quite a bit. It's free for everybody, but you'd have to know how to set it up, obviously. But
Right.
for my own benefit, it's pretty handy, because I do it for a living, and on my own time I can take advantage of that powerful software and build something.
Right. That is cool.
Just one less cost that I got to apply to the farm.
Right. I do all mine in Excel, but having something that pushes a button might be a little easier.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I said, these are what I had listed for the production records for using the formulas to make those thoughtful decisions, right? There are a lot of other reasons to cull an animal, and so keeping track of any of those things would be helpful.
Yeah, that
So
was
this
one
is-
other question I had. You'd mentioned, like fish teats or multiples being one of your primary culling things. Would you still cull them even if they were darn good weight producers?
The reason that I would cull the adult animals, it would depend, right? Did I have somebody else that I could cull in their place? Then maybe not. If they were the low man on the totem poles to be scratched for culling, then yes, I would consider that.
That makes sense.
The biggest reason that I would that I would not select babies for replacements that had multiple teats was because I did have trouble with babies trying to attach to those non-working smaller teats and not getting milk, right? So I didn't start off by culling the mom. I just didn't keep replacements that had multiple teats. And so it slowly worked its way out of the herd.
Makes sense. Thank you.
And then Kim, I see you had a question about getting started and would goats be better? I assume you're asking if would goats be better than sheep. It depends. And it really depends on the food source that you have on your farm. If you have improved pastures and you have more grass than you have hard weeds, I would say sheep are probably the way to go. If you have a lot of hard weeds or woody weeds or multiflora rose or blackberries or small shrubs or things like that, then I would really look at goats rather than sheep. Having their preferred feed source on the farm is probably step one in determining which species to go with. And then I also always caution somebody about getting into the hot next thing, right? When prices are hot, whether it's the cattle industry, we see this a lot in the cattle industry, actually. When prices are really high, everybody wants to become a cattleman. And they go out and they buy animals when prices are really high, thinking they're going to stay there, and they always come down. Goats have been an anomaly in the last 20 years that they've had an average price increase almost every year for the last 20 years. Eventually, those prices will take a turn and they will come down. So I caution you not to get into it just because the price is high. Goats are definitely a special species. It takes the special farmer to love goats on their farm. They're really kind of a pain in the butt. I mean, they remind me of like the toddler of the farm of all livestock species, right? They're always getting into trouble. They're always doing something to cause problems. So it takes a certain kind of farmer to really love goats on the farm. So those are things that you might consider when you consider raising sheep or goats. Yes, Eric, I think I see your hand raised.
Okay, so along that line, so I've had goats on the place for about 10 years, and they've really cleaned the place up, but it's almost to the point where they ignore the brushy stuff and eat grass instead. I mean, so I guess I've developed a culture where, you know, they're happy with what they think they have. And so, I mean, is there a problem at some point down the road where they're not going to be getting what they need? You know what I'm saying? I mean, I mean, I have plenty of ragweed and they like eating that, you know, but, you know, so I mean, I don't have like lush cattle pastures, you know, I've got some high speed people around me that, you know, I learned a long time ago I can't keep up with. But it just seems like, you know, they're content to go out there and move across the pasture and eat the grass instead of looking at the little bit of buckbrush that's still in the fence row.
So it sounds like you've trained your animals to eat grass. And I giggle because I talked to a producer once that bought goats to clean up. He brought them as brush goats, just a few of them to clean up the brush in his cattle farm. And they wouldn't touch anything. They were grass eaters, which is unusual for goats. But like I said, what works on your farm and your environment, right? So somebody had goats and they learned to eat grass. And when he got these young goats home, they ate no brush. They ate grass, and he ended up selling them and buying different goats because he needed brush goats. So to answer your question, Eric, if you can keep them eating with their heads up, okay? My biggest concern for a goat eating grass would be internal parasites. I mean, just that's what comes to my mind. And honestly, if you need to teach them to eat something different, you might think about buying an animal from a farm that is using them as brush goats and they're eating those kinds of things, and bring in that adult animal to teach some of the others that, hey, you can eat this stuff too. Because I really think that's all it is that it was taught. Susan, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say that pretty much you're going to have to retrain them. If you look up a video called Cows Eat My Weeds, it's called Cows Eat My Weeds. And it is Kathy Voth, V-O-T-H, and she will teach you how to correct this problem. And goats and sheep will train up the same way as cows will to come back and eat more weeds. And I've got sheep that will eat thistles until they turn fuzzy. And so no matter, you know, how that thistle looks, as long as it's not turning white and fuzzy, they will eat the whole thing. So basically I had trouble with thistles, and now we don't hardly see any out here. There's a few left, but you can go through and train them. Another way to correct that is maybe use a little polywire or some electronetting and push them back to those weedy places and get them back into finding out that there are some other things out there to eat. But if you really think that they're struggling to know what those plants are, then a good way to do it is the Kathy Voth method. And it only takes a couple of days, maybe 4 days, and they'll be back to eating novel feeds again that they're not used to.
I'm gonna have to look that up. Thanks, Susan. I'd like my sheep to eat thistle. That'd be nice.
Yeah, they like it a lot. If, I mean, it's a pretty good plant. People can eat thistles too, if you know what to select, but not everybody's into eating those kinds of weeds. But it's, you know, it's how much information do you want to collect?
Any other last questions?
I did put in there where to find information on how to look at teeth and tell how old your animal is. That is from ATRA, and that article is by Susan Shanian, called Teeth Tags and TSE. And if you look up www.attra.ncat.org, and then just put that title in the search box. Once you get into their website, there's that article is in there, and it'll show you some really good graphics on how to mouth a sheep or a goat until about the age that they are. And it looks like we have another question. Okay, yeah.
I think I've got it.
Okay.
Well, I've got the link anyways.
Okay, and our sheep price is the same for hair sheep? Oh, that is the question.
So in Missouri, actually, hair sheep prices are higher than woolly prices. I don't think hair sheep grow quite as fast as our woolies do. However, hair sheep prices are higher. And I have studied our Missouri markets enough to know that we actually sell more hair sheep in Missouri than we sell wool sheep in Missouri.
Yeah.
So yes, good call on that one. I did not tease that out this time because I was using national data, and unfortunately they don't separate it. But Missouri has started separating it, and we just have from about April of 19 was the beginning of that data set. So I'm waiting for it to grow a little more before I really start incorporating it into the market outlook. I'd like to have at least 5 years of data. So, but yes, good question, Vicki. And then Allison, that link there is to the training article to teach them to eat weeds. It is a PDF that comes up.
And there should be a video too. It's probably 4, 5, 6 years old, something like that, but it's still, it's pretty interesting. And, oh yeah. And, you know, while you're looking at these markets, I mean, we're talking averages here. And, you know, you got to look at other markets sometimes. And there's a lot of ways to find niche markets. And like I sell sheep for horns, just for their horns. And so, you know, don't be afraid to look around and find some other interesting kinds of buyers, because, you know, that might be an unfair advantage that you have for your farm, because you're located in the right spot to sell cuts of meat and get a better price for them like that. So, you know, if you need to have to brainstorm with somebody, get Jennifer or I and Patrick, and we'll help you look at like what's your location, what's your ethnicities that are located around you, what kind of people are wanting lamb and goat meat. So don't be afraid to think outside the box, because it could just find you a specific group to market to. And also, I'm over on the Kansas City side of Missouri, and if you cross over the line into Kansas, there's a meat market over there that still has halal harvest, and they have USDA inspected halal harvest. And they go out every Saturday. You can go out and select the animal you want, and they will kill it right there for you and process it, and you can take it that same day. So the people that take their sheep into that market they're getting basically cash purchase. And then that person takes, they pay the Steve's Meat Market to process it there, because they will have halal processors right there that day. And then if you want kosher slaughter, if you bring your rabbi and he can bless it, they will fulfill those traditions and laws as well. So look for other ways to market your animals that don't just get stuck in this box of looking at USDA prices.
Right. And these, like I said, I use these market prices because they tend to be the price floor. I would also caution you, if you sell private off your farm, I would not sell for less than what you can get at auction. I mean, that's just somebody kind of taking advantage of you if you're doing that.
Yeah. And that's
So-
a good reason to keep up with prices, because you don't know until you check those prices what they're going to be this week. And selling at your local livestock auction is not always the best place either, just because you don't know what those prices are going to be, because it's any given Saturday or whatever that market day is, how many buyers are there, and who's looking for that specific kind of an animal that you might have. And so you're taking a shot in the dark pretty much when it comes down to going to the local livestock auction. And sometimes that's where we got to go, but kind of watch those prices and call those auction houses and see what their average was for that week. A lot of times they'll tell you, or they've got them listed on Facebook. Easy place to get numbers for a local price list, but it's not an average. And, so the averages give you that, like Jennifer said, that baseline number. You want to try and shoot for something better than that.
I'm going to share my screen one more time here. So if you do a Google search for USDA goat prices, you can bring up the USDA Ag Marketing Service. And this lists all the USDA reported auctions across the country. Now, not every state has them that sell sheep and goats, but you can pull them up and maybe you can get close to your area and what you're marketing. And so as you pull these up, let's say we pull up the upstate in Williamston, South Carolina. And we take a look at that report. So we got cattle. Looks like this little market sells a lot of things. They only sold 14 goats. Last reported, they sold 48 goats. So they don't sell very many in their market, right? They didn't sell any replacements. They didn't sell any pigs, and they didn't sell any sheep. If you scroll on down here, you'll get to what their prices were once we get past the cattle. There we go. So our slaughter goats, they had 3 head of kids. There was your weight range. There was your price range. Okay. And then their nannies and does, again, the weight range and price range for those animals. And so it makes it really easy to see kind of what's going on, especially once you figure out, what market is closest to you that runs enough numbers through. I don't think I would use that market and say that, hey, this is a good price. They just didn't sell enough head to make that a good price. And if nothing else, go out here to Texas and Producers Livestock Auction, because they run the largest number of head through the country. You can see here, total head was 5,000 for the week between their sheep and goats. And it was down from the previous week of 6,000 head for the previous week. I couldn't imagine running that many sheep and goats through a sale barn in a day. Good Lord. Yeah. So if nothing else, come look over here and see kind of what the prices are doing. Same thing, they'll separate it by size and by carcass quality. If you see the per CWT, that's per hundredweight. So essentially this is $2.69 a pound or $269 for 100 pounds. And then it'll even break out the average price based on the average weight and the price range. And so that's kind of nice to see. Sometimes when they sell replacement animals, they will sell it by the head rather than by the hundredweight. Trying to scroll through here, see if there are any. I see this generally in smaller markets, not necessarily in the large markets, and usually in the replacements or in the families. So, and I lost my chat boxes, Susan, so I don't know if there's any other questions or not.
One more question. What is the difference in choice and prime? Quite a bit some days.
Right. That's going to be how well muscled the animal is, essentially. Prime is going to be a perfect muscling, a nice back fat going on with it, and then a nice intermuscular fat going on with it. And then choice is going to be a little less, right? It's definitely not going to be a utility or anything like that. There are other words out there for it. There's about four or five categories total. And so prime is going to be, if you know anything about the goat market, prime is going to be like your Boer goats, right? A really thick animal with a nice back fat coverage. And then choice is going to be a well-muscled animal, but maybe not quite as good as the prime. Does that sound about right, Susan?
Yeah, that's pretty much my experience too. They don't want to see that leaner animal, that working animal. They want to see a finished animal for those prices and those kinds of carcass quality.
USDA does define this. So it is actually defined in their lamb grades and standards. And they usually have photos. Yeah, here we go. So it's an age, it's a combination of age and then flank fat or side fat, essentially. And that's kind of how they put that in there. Does that help, Travis?
And don't forget about looking into your different halal and kosher holidays. You know, that's another one of those niche markets where you can make a killing if you are paying attention to that, what carcass they want. You know, sometimes it is about the color of their hair. Some animals, they want to see a black, non-blemished animal, all black, and usually male, uncastrated. And then you got your 40 pounders and your 80 pounders. And, you know, goats or sheep, either one, if you're hitting into those religious markets, you can, you know, if you start watching those and try to have animals ready for those markets, you may not sell your whole flock that are like weanlings or whatever, but if you could send a percentage in there, that's sure going to help your averages on the farm for sure, because people will look for that certain kind of an animal that suits their holiday. And if they can find it, they will pay good money for it. But you have to pretty much have something ready to go. And remember, these are movable holidays. So, or movable feast holidays, so that you have to know when they hit the calendar and your animal's got to be ready for that no matter when it happens. And you want to be at least 4 to 2 weeks out from that holiday to hit those. Because most of those cultures do not prefer to have frozen meat. So they want it pretty fresh. So, you know, if you can get into those and you have folks that want that kind of meat, then, you know, you got to get in with your locker and get them cut up that way. But that's a pretty specialty market, and that's a direct marketing tool.
Yeah, keep in mind too, if you're targeting those religious holidays or ethnic religious holidays, sometimes there are special rituals around those animals too. So it may
Right.
not actually be going to your meat locker and selling meat. You may just be selling that live animal for them to take home and slaughter themselves so that
Yep.
they can observe their religious ceremony.
Right. And like if there is halal harvesting where you are, then they'll go through that, but there's, you know, they like to see that live animal, and a lot of times they want to go ahead and kill it themselves. So if you're not prepared for that, I would not offer that. I mean, it's perfectly fine to do it, but keep in mind, you don't ever want to touch that animal. You want to let them do it. And you're going to be the one doing the cleanup. So that's what you got to be prepared for. And I would charge that.
And different states have different rules. So definitely check with your state to make sure you can do on-farm slaughter.
That's true. That's true. Because it is different from state to state. So be prepared for that.
Eric, I see your hand still up. I didn't know if you had another question or if that was from earlier or.
Must be from earlier. I don't know how to put my hand down, so
That's all right.
I'm on my phone instead of computer, so I'm not having much luck with this.
I gotcha. Well, if there's not any last questions, I think we'll go ahead and call it good.
Thank you all for being on this evening. Again, we'll be on next week on Tuesday night, starting at 7. I'll be talking about nutrition, winter feeding, management, and getting ready for lambing and kidding season. And so with that, thank you. Again, I'll have a link for this probably tomorrow. Convert this to a YouTube video and send the link out tomorrow if you like that. So with that, thank you for being on. Thank you, Jennifer, for the presentation tonight. And thank you, Susan, for helping. We'll see you next time.